This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and this afternoon I'm very pleased to welcome back to the Guildford Dragon, Guildford's MP, Zöe Franklin. Welcome back to the Dragon, Zöe.
Good afternoon, Martin.
And first of all, I was wondering if you've been at Westminster now as an MP for nearly a year. It might seem incredible, but that is the case. Looking back on that year, what have been the highlights? What have been the lessons? What have been the things that have puzzled you or you don't like about Westminster and the House of Commons?
Uh, there's definitely been a lot of quizzical, puzzled looks from me as to all of what I will describe as the pageantry that goes with the very sensible processes to get things done in Parliament. I think if we were starting from scratch, we probably wouldn't do many of the things that we do now, ranging from the bobbing, which is all that up and down that people
Oh
see
yeah.
when they watch the chamber. Uh, it's often a very loud environment. I think I might have talked about that with you in those early days, just kind of understanding how that kind of the shouting of here, here, and the interjecting works. But it's been an absolute pleasure. So I've loved being able to speak up for Guildford in the Chamber. I've loved building a team who can work alongside me to serve residents through the casework support we do. So all those people who have contacted me to say, I've got this issue, can you help? It's been amazing to help probably hundreds, if not thousands, of residents across Guildford. And also, I mean, I've lived in Guildford a long time. And yes, I have found so many organisations and parts of the constituency that I didn't know about and I now know about and are doing absolutely amazing things in the constituency, working with local people. It's been such a pleasure.
And you're saying that even though you were a borough councillor and must have got to
Yeah.
know Guildford pretty well through that role.
And that's the thing. I thought I knew Guildford well, and in a sense I did. But then there's all these new organisations who have come out of the woodwork and kind of highlighted their work to me. And it's incredible how many people, how many companies there are doing amazing, innovative work, how many voluntary organisations are working with local people, doing incredible things. And yeah, absolute pleasure getting to know the constituency even better.
Now, it's said about soldiering that it's long periods of boredom interspersed with periods of high excitement. Is that what an MP's life is like, or not so much?
No. So I would say there's long periods where you don't feel you're making any meaningful progress on legislation. And that is the nature, particularly of being in the not leading party. And then there are periods of effectively great excitement where you are in the chamber making legislation, voting on legislation. But in those periods where you aren't making the legislative progress, you are focusing on other things. So I might be focusing on a particular issue in the constituency or trying to get change on a topic that's come up through the casework that I'm working on, or doing visits in the constituency to understand issues better or meet a new organisation.
Now, zooming in back on Guildford, perhaps the most important local issue at the moment, although it might not be the highest profile for many people here still, is the reorganisation of local government. And you've organised the petition. Can you give us, before we discuss the petition, can you give us your overview of the situation and why you have the preferences you have?
Yeah, sure. And so essentially, what the government have done is decide the whole country where there are currently district and borough councils and county councils will be simplified and there will be unitaries covering particular areas of the country. So what that means for Surrey is that Surrey County Council will go, as will the district and boroughs that we know and love, so Guildford, Waverley, wherever, and there will be unitaries covering currently undefined areas of Surrey.
Sorry to
And
interrupt, Joe,
so,
but the difference,
yeah,
if you just explain the difference between a unitary and what we've got now.
yeah, of course. So instead of there being two tiers of two layers of local government, there will just be one. So actually, there are some real positives in that. It certainly simplifies it for local residents. I have had so many conversations which go, the council didn't sort my bins, or there's potholes. Why are there potholes? And I will say, well, the bins are Guildford and the potholes are Surrey. And the person will go, quite rightly, but I just want to talk to the council. So this will simplify it for
Mm.
residents, which I think is a great thing. It's also happening, frankly, because of the financial situation of Surrey. There is approximately £6 billion of debt across the county, and that's at both the district council level, and everyone probably knows about the situation in Woking. There's also Spelthorne, but also Surrey itself have about 1 billion. That's the county council. So the government has said it needs to be resolved. We don't know how. Probably local government reorganisation is the way to go because there are efficiencies and they can also work out how to address the debt. And then there's been this period of the
Sorry to
councils.
interrupt again, but before we move on from the debt, it seems to me this is a really key issue and one that could provoke
Yeah,
the strongest feelings in Surrey residents because
yeah.
we're here in Guildford. I think we would say, well, why are we having to take on Woking's debt? Well, how is that fair? We didn't have any say in
Yeah,
that.
yeah, 100%, Martin. And it's exactly why I've started the petition that I have, because I've spoken to lots of people on the doorstep, and the initial anger that they felt was, hang on, you've scrapped my elections. I don't get to have my say in May about the county council. And then when they've moved past or kind of dealt with that anger, and we then start talking about the debt, they go, but I didn't back up this debt. My council didn't rack up
Huh.
this debt. And so this 6 billion has almost entirely been backed up by Conservative led councils in the past, and understandably, residents in areas which didn't rack it up are upset, angry, confused as to why they should foot the bill. And currently, we don't know what approach the government is going to take. They have said that they will write off 1 billion of Woking's um, unmanageable debt, but that still leaves £5 billion worth of debt that at the moment the residents of Surrey might have to foot the bill for. And I think that's unfair. I think that really needs to be looked at, and I'm looking to the government to find a solution to help address that. And the petition came out of the many conversations I've had with residents, but also Residents Association, Guildford Residents Association raised this issue with me, and I also talked to all these conversations, and there's the anger and frustration that people feel that they're also not having a say in that process.
But if I can play devil's advocate, if let's say I was a resident in Cumbria and the government announced that they're going to write off the debt, if that is what they decide to do, I know that may be maybe not very likely, but let's say they did announce that, that would mean all the taxpayers across the country would have to bear the burden. And if I'm in Cumbria, I might think to, well, why the hell should I pay what's going in Surrey? I mean, Surrey's meant to be this
Yeah.
affluent county. Why should I be contributing towards that?
And completely understand and hear that. But I think the key thing about the petition is it helps government to realise that there is this strength of feeling in the county and make them look at what options might be available. So that might be a full write off, but it might also be a conversation around actually, could we look at writing off the interest? And there are lots of different scenarios that could come to play. But if we don't make our voice heard to say, you know what, we're not okay with carrying the can for debt that was not created by our local area and will impact on service delivery, we want you to look again at this. There's a real concern that the government will just say, well, we don't need to look in detail. We'll just make Surrey foot the bill. So I want to, effectively, I'm trying to start a really big conversation with the government to say, local residents are understandably angry. How are you going to address this?
Okay, and you started a petition. We'll put the link in with the with this article so that people can, if
Thank
they
you.
want to, can sign it if they want to. But before we move on from local government reorganisation, don't you think there's well, probably more than one, but one very important lesson to learn here is that the councils in the past, as you will recall, were encouraged to be entrepreneurial. And
Mm.
that meant that they started taking risks, and some of the risks they took were not well judged at all, obviously. Don't you think that there is a lesson that councils are not businesses and cannot, it's not, they should not be taking those risks on behalf of their taxpayers because at the end, who's going to pay the bills?
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more, Martin. And I remember back in the years where I was a councillor, myself and the Liberal Democrats back then, both in Guildford and across Surrey, were raising questions with the Conservative led councils going, Why are you investing in property, not even in your own borough, when clearly property is a high risk game and this is taxpayers' money that you are investing? And what if it all goes wrong? And unfortunately, it'd been wonderful if we hadn't been proved that there is a whole question mark over this. But it did go wrong, and it's gone wrong badly. And we've got this debt that's been run up. And for obviously Woking are the clear example of how some of it is manageable and some of it is not. And then there's also the element that there's also been problems around the audit function, which feels very dull to talk about, but is very crucial. If councils are not being audited and made sure that their decisions are being made well and properly and sustainably, you do run an even higher risk where decisions have been made, they're not picked up early, and it spirals from there.
Yes, I mean, Surrey Heath has just discovered from their audit that they've got a much higher debt level than they realised.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, but also associated with that, doesn't it also mean that local government has to be properly funded by central government so they don't feel driven to take these risks?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I've been saying a lot about it over the last couple of years, as have my colleagues. The problem has been that funding from government to local government has been cut over the last decade. And at the same time as local government being asked to do even more. And obviously, as well, you've got the cost of living that every day people are seeing in their own pockets. And so you can't keep delivering the same quality of services on less money. And yes, of course, we should always be looking for how can we find efficiencies? Can we work more effectively? But you can't a million efficiencies won't solve the problem that there is not enough money currently. And certainly I'm looking alongside colleagues, and I'm sure other parties will feel the same. We're looking to the spending review in the autumn from the government to actually see a long-term commitment to properly funding local government so that when we see these new councils formed, that they are sustainable for the long term and can deliver the level of services that people expect and need.
Now, you're in the happy position of not having to defend so much of a track record on this issue. But it is tricky for the national government too, isn't it? Because their coffers are under pressure as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't want to be in the place of some of the ministers, particularly Rachel Reeves, as they're needing to make these decisions, because you are having to constantly look at what are the priorities. But I think, given that they are asking so much of local government, and particularly if you think about what local government delivers, it delivers social care. Absolutely crucial part that helps to ensure that the NHS, which is already on its knees, doesn't fall over. It's delivering education. And then at a local, at a district level, you've also got housing, absolutely crucial services, but they can't run if they're not properly funded.
No, children's services too, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Now, I wanted to take the opportunity of speaking to you today about Thames Water because that's in the news this morning. And I know that you've long campaigned about the performance of Thames Water. What's your comment on the news this morning?
To be honest, I'm really pleased that we're seeing this level of fine to highlight to Thames Water that
Sorry,
they
I beg
cannot.
your pardon, Zoe. It's my fault. I should have explained what the news was this morning, i.e.,
Yeah,
that
of
Thames
course,
Water is facing a was it 150
122.
122 million fine for not providing the services they should.
Yeah, and particularly for the continuous sewage discharges, which is the thing that I often talk
Yeah.
about so often. Thames Water have failed to invest in the right infrastructure. They continue allowed sewage to flow into rivers across the country, including our fabulous River Wey, and they continue to pay bosses bonuses. And at this point, Ofwat has finally cracked down on them and said, no, you will be fined 122 million. And it frankly, I think it should be the final nail in Thames Water's coffin as a company. I really want to see it moved into being a public benefit company with environmental experts and residents on the board to help the company to understand the services it provides. And also, we do need Ofwat. This is a rare example of Ofwat doing the right thing. Too often, Ofwat doesn't have the teeth to actually make decisions to run these fines for the companies. So it's a step in the right direction, but there's still more that can be done.
But if it does become effectively nationalised, then again the taxpayer will have to foot the bills, won't he or she?
Potentially, but I think we have to look very hard at the fact that it was privatized in order to attempt to, well, with the whole premise being that if you privatized it, there'd be investment in the infrastructure that wasn't happening when it was nationalized. Well, what ended up happening is there wasn't the right investment, and shareholders got huge
Yes.
benefits
Yeah.
financially from that. It clearly hasn't worked. At some point, you have to turn around and go, actually, we need to revisit this. And for me as a Liberal Democrat, public benefit company is the right approach, in my opinion. But you can't shy away from the fact that it will cost money. But the public benefit route means that it's less of a burden for the taxpayer financially.
Okay, but another lesson to learn there, really, because it wasn't unknown at the time that dividends were being paid out, even though there were things to invest in our water infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving your time today. I know you have a busy schedule, and I hope we can do this again in due course. And yeah, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Martin.